Now I'll call up Mark Hallenbeck and Elizabeth Sall and Maggie Cawley.
Really interesting and pick up stuff on each other. Oh, yeah. At the end of the day, we have to make it interesting for everybody,
right? I managed to close my laptop in the last session, so I need to bring it back up before I have my notes. So.
No worries. All right. What do you want to know? Your favorite color? Okay. So I'm Maggie Cawley. I serve as the executive director for OpenStreetMap US. My background is in GIS and urban planning, so a lot of these talks today really spoke to that background. OpenStreetMap US is a nonprofit based everywhere, small nonprofit, and I guess I would say, OpenStreetMap is such a distributed ecosystem of people, 10 million people, who do you talk to? So OpenStreetMap US serves as the convener and the community support and kind of the Center for Collaboration in the United States. I'm based in Richmond, Virginia, and it's my first time in Seattle, so good to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry, the weather's not better.
The
tulips are out.
Cherry blossoms are out too.
Sort of. I'm Elizabeth Sall. I am a sole proprietor consultant under the name Urban Labs, but I'm here today on behalf of my job as a pseudo public sector person with the California Integrated Travel Project. I most of the time live down the street just across the freeway here in Seattle, but this year my family is experimenting with living near the ski areas, and mountain biking areas. So we're living in this fake Bavarian village of Leavenworth, Washington, and learning about rural transit and access, which has been an awesome. I've learned so much in the past 8 months in a good way. And Mark, are you sure you don't want me to introduce you?
You can.
No.
A dangerous precedent, but I've often said, don't let me give you my title. Invent a title. I always want to be Grand Poobah or something. But anyway, I'm Mark Hallenbeck. I'm the director of the Washington State Transportation Center here on the UW campus. I am a transportation professional. Of course, all of you guys are transportation professionals. You travel, so you become a transportation professional. No, I don't. No, I fake that. I fake a lot of my life. I've spent the last 40 years mostly collecting data, figuring out how to store data, and most importantly, how to use data to make transportation decisions. I help a lot of transportation organizations. From a learning experience, I had nothing to do with ADA until I had the glory of meeting Anat. And so the last 4 or 5 years have been a huge education for me. And so I come to the Transportation Data Equity Initiative project kind of representing, much like Elizabeth, I pretend I am a city employee, a state DOT employee, because I've lived that life, often pretending I am that individual. At the same time, I have gotten the great opportunity to learn so much about OpenStreetMap, to learn about how important preferences are to how people travel. So in some respects, I will pretend I am the TDI expert, which I'm only fake badly, and in some respects I will pretend I am a Washington State DOT employee, which I'm really going to aim at Thomas over there, or I'll pretend I'm a city DOT employee. So I'm going to pretend, along with Elizabeth, that we actually can represent the organizations of the world.
Well, thank you for joining our panel today. My first question, if you could spend 5 to 7 minutes about the effort that you're representing at this panel, specifically, well, we'll start with public domain maps. Sorry, Maggie, it's been a long day.
Sorry, we're almost to our word limit, I think, in the day. So I'll try to use as few as possible. So I kind of have to take a step back from that, though. Sorry, I tell a little story. I came into the executive director role in 2020. Before that, OpenStreetMap US was served by 5 volunteer board members who changed every year. So it was great for OpenStreetMap US as an organization to have that support, but it was often very difficult to collaborate with external agencies or companies or anyone really, because there wasn't someone to talk to that would consistently be there. So when I joined that role as a first paid staff for this nonprofit, it kind of, I stepped into a vacuum of sorts. All of a sudden there was somebody to yell at or ask for help, but also collaborate with. And one of the first groups that reached out was U.S. Department of Transportation. Daryl's in the room, and said, hey, we'd like to work with the OpenStreetMap community. What does that even look like? So I had the opportunity of starting to model what could that potentially look like in the U.S. This is a new thing for us. And it became very clear to me from the beginning that private industry and nonprofits and the public had kind of already bought volunteered geographic information or crowdsourced data. But the government was kind of like that last frontier in a way. So how do we start to engage and create mutually beneficial relationships for both the open data and the public data communities? So in 2020, OpenStreetMap US formed a government committee to start to bring those stakeholders together in the same room, the mappers, private industry, but mainly those government agencies and state, local, and federal representatives to kind of talk about what the barriers were and begin to understand the challenges and the lack of translation between the two communities so we can start to address some of those barriers to incorporating something like OpenStreetMap into those workflows. What am I at, like 3.5 minutes? Okay. So one of the first things was how do we improve the interoperability between the data? Because if you're familiar with OpenStreetMap, you can bring pretty much any data type or license into the database. But it's often a little bit harder to bring it back out and redistribute it. And if you're a federal agency, all of the data you create has to be put into the public domain. You can't do that with Open Database License and OpenStreetMap. So that was kind of all right, well, I'll just ignore that. So other crowdsourcing initiatives started popping up within the federal agencies. So National Map Corps is an example that the USGS created to start to try to crowdsource data because federal agencies are increasingly seeing the need for that kind of data. There's, it's more up to date. There's a lot of data gaps to fill. But we don't need 2 parallel roads. How do we bring those together? So we started exploring this question of how do we start to make these processes a little bit more efficient? Let's figure out the barriers, and then we can start building the path. And that's how Public Domain Map was born. So you have 2 crowds. We'll just use those 2 examples. The OpenStreetMap community, almost 10 million people out there. You have the National Map Corps being supported by our federal government, collecting similar data. Let's start with bringing the crowds together. So we create a tool that, introduce it to the National Map Corps, bring it in the OpenStreetMap. So what we're building is, it's hard to explain without my pictures. So let's build something where we combine the crowds, have the data distributed into both OpenStreetMap and the public domain, and have it be authoritative. Really easy things to tackle. So we're starting to build a project through OpenStreetMap US with the stakeholder community. We've USGS, US Department of Transportation, and this committee, government working group that's been around now for 3 years. And it will enable government agents to access the power of the crowd and contribute authoritative, validated data into OpenStreetMap. So it kind of creates the best of both worlds. I can go into the details of how that works if you want, but that's kind of the general overview. And part of the step is also, once the data is mapped, so you have a crowd mapping, but there's a step within the master. Like right now we're doing the railroad tunnels in Colorado as our pilot. So we have MapCorps volunteers and OpenStreetMap volunteers adding these tunnels, and then a representative from the FRA is going to go in and validate them. And once that data is validated, it will then go into the public domain and then be conflated into OpenStreetMap. So the work stream is benefiting both sides. And I'll stop there because I can go into the weeds. But, all right. Where did I go?
Who's next?
Elizabeth, would you like to represent the MDIP and tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So to discuss I'm here to talk about the mobility data interoperability principles, or MDIP, as some people call them. And there are many other co-signers and co-owners of this, co-authors of this initiative in this room. But I'm going to start with telling a little bit of the background story of why it exists. And many years ago, at this point, actually only a couple of years ago, as part of the California Integrated Travel Project, which if you go to calitp.org, you can learn more about that, but I'm not here to talk about it. Thomas, Craig, and I, were wondering, why is it that it's hard for all of these transit agencies to produce good schedule data, good GTFS data, and what are the barriers for them to actually be producing this? And this was especially acute during COVID, where agencies that were previously putting out a schedule like maybe once every year, all of a sudden they're changing their schedule every week because the amount of operators they had varied, fluctuated by 80% every week. And so in interviewing them, there were a few really repetitive points and emergent points that came from that. One was that there was so much manual data entry from one software platform to another. And so much was just people with master's degrees, sometimes PhDs, doing triple data entry by manually because they did not have the ability to have one piece of software talk to another. And the biggest gap seemed to be in between scheduling systems for transit and the operations software, or CAD-AVL as it's often called. And so this was a huge gap. And the more we asked about the interactions between other systems, the more we found more and more of these gaps, that these systems did not talk to each other, or if they did, it was because they had paid basically a ransom fee to the vendors to be able to get their data out. And it just struck us as this is bizarre. These are public agencies with public data going into software, and then it's basically being held ransom by these private software vendors. And so, of course, we knock on the door of the software vendors and are like, hey, so it looks like you guys are holding all our data ransom and doing that across the state at these hundreds of different transit agencies. What's up with that? That doesn't seem cool. And they were like, yeah, well, we would love to not all of them said this, I should say, but many of them were quite eager to interact with all of these other data tools and other software products that were used across the agency, but they didn't have a means to do so. They weren't venture funded. They didn't have a product development roadmap that wasn't fed by RFPs. So they couldn't proactively do any of this, and they basically had to be paid explicitly for any work, and all that project-based work were often one-offs for specific agencies. So this was clearly a chicken and egg problem, and so thinking about that, we sort of thought, well, what if we sort of harnessed created an entire ecosystem where basically we had a whole bunch of people, agencies, big agencies, vendors sign on to the ideals of creating an interoperable ecosystem across all of transit that supported open data standards, or open standards as we call them, across the ecosystem. And if we get enough buy-in, that'll create enough of a market to be able to demonstrate to these vendors that there is a market for this, and we can get all of the people who sign on to commit to requiring all of these open standards across the all market and create solve it at a market level. And so we initiated that, I think it was in 2021. I don't remember the years anymore. No, in the mid-pandemic. I think it was 2021, and sort of had this draft out of these 5 principles, which I'm not going to read them out loud, but you can go to interoperablemobility.org and look at them. And we wordsmithed the heck out of those principles with many different agencies. We had public meetings, we had private meetings, we had meetings with vendors, and really arrived at a 6 months later at a cohesive set of principles that we could all agree to. And now, at this time, we have, I don't know what it is at this point. We have something like a dozen or so what we're calling co-authors, who are the owners of the principles and own what the definitions are, what the principles are. We can and the direction of things that are the way that the project is going. And we have many dozen different what we call co-signers, which basically, and these are a lot of software vendors, a lot of other agencies that basically said, we support this and we will be held accountable to the standards of these principles. And so what we're hoping in the next couple of years is that we'll be able to, not in the next couple of years, next couple of months, I should say now, is that we'll, Thomas has been, who probably should be up here, had been, and I have been diligently, but mainly Thomas, has been diligently working on a procurement guide. Basically says, like, if you are a co-signer of the interoperability principles, these are the things you should include in your procurement. You should include things like GTFS. You should include things like the operational data standard. If you are doing this type of software, you need to have this kind of standard that's an input and output. It also includes things about data privacy and for users, and about making sure that things are interoperable with other data standards. And it also sets a roadmap for the future of, like, how do we identify gaps in the ecosystem of where we need to create data standards. One of the first ones of those that we've developed as a community is called this community, at least. There's lots of other data standard development communities. It's called the Operational Data Standard, which builds on top of GTFS and is now live in several different software vendors' software right now, including Swiftly, and we have some live productions at MBTA and a few others, which is super exciting. And we're in the process of identifying what a roadmap and a prioritization scheme is for future software standards. So I'm going to leave it there.
Nice, well done.
Awesome, thank you. Lastly but not least, Mark Hallenbeck will introduce the TDI from the perspective of data aggregation, so the Transportation Data Equity Initiative.
So I could talk for long hours and bad stories. So I'm going to start with how I met Anat. Anat and I were working in the data science for social good. You actually saw references to it when she was working with King County Metro, and that led to the Open Sidewalk project. And as a transportation data geek, I went, sidewalk data? You have sidewalk data? Really? I've built lots of data systems over my life. The worst thing that can ever happen is create the big pile of data and sit it somewhere, and it solves somebody's problem, which they scrounged money for because some legislator yelled at them, right? Or they got sued. And as soon as they were done with it, they solved that problem, and the big pile of data sat there for another 3 years, and nobody ever used it, and the next time the budget came, it went away. Every public agency I've ever been associated with, and there are way too many of them, lacks money for data, lacks skills for maintaining the data, don't have the resources to maintain it, don't know how to manipulate it, don't know how to share it. Those are huge problems. And then you run into a good computer scientist and you think, oh, here we go, let's go. I always said the best thing that ever happened to public data was the recession in 2008, when all those tech companies went out of business, and suddenly people said, wow, a public sector job that has benefits and lasts, I'll go there. It was the best thing that ever happened on the DOT side of software development. So this huge need for pedestrian infrastructure to tell us what's going on, because this need has grown. The desire to actually have data to make decisions grew alongside. And Anat and I said, oh, I can take advantage of working with you. Wow, what a great opportunity to do the things you've heard now. Agencies lack money, they lack direction, they lack skill sets. Money shows up surreptitiously, spontaneously as a result of something. And the transportation agency person goes, how do I spend this usefully so that it will come back to me? And I look for direction. I look for, can I borrow a set of specs? Because, oh, yeah, we need that, we need that, we need that. And so we look for, on the public sector side, information to help us do things intelligently. Anat and I, working together, go, wow, these are things to do. And you saw all that wonderful technical detail, which escapes an old Fortran programmer like me. And I think, oh, yes, we need the computer scientists in the room to tell us how to make this stuff work. We need the DOTs to tell us how the money can be arranged, how we're actually going to maintain it, and what those rules are. To tell us, you need these 18 additional data items so that we can actually use it. And if those come together, you get a system that's used, and the data source that's used continues to improve, it continues to have benefit, and it has a virtual cycle associated with it. So the TDI, as envisioned as being built, is designed to do those things. It's designed to lower the cost of collecting data. It's designed to take advantage of the crowd, where I use the crowd in the big sense, in that we are a community, we're in this together, how can we support each other? It's designed to be inclusive in the big sense, to make sure we understand the underserved communities that really need this information. But at the same time, we have to understand how it operates in the organizational sense. We have to understand how it can be sustained in a modern computer science environment. And the TDI is designed to do that. And that's why you're all here. And thank you for coming. Because it's only as a result of everybody in this room together talking to each other and saying, it's a really good idea, this way to make it happen, and that's why you're here, and thank you very much for doing so.
Thank you. Next, based on your own experience, what are the most salient barriers that data producers experience, and you kind of spoke to that already, Mark, with publishing standard data sets? And you can talk about anything from in-house skill sets, which you mentioned, lack of political will, funding, misunderstandings, liability, bad tooling, inability to assure quality, et cetera, et cetera. So what's most thorny for you?
I mean, you can imagine that all of those are an issue when people hear about OpenStreetMap. Who gave you the right to map my house? I've gotten that a few times. Gosh, what would be most relevant today? I think a lot of it, that dealing with it is, the person who's supposed to be speaking oftentimes for 8 million other people is the hesitancy to use crowdsourced data, and that trust of who is that other person out there? What about vandalism? What if it's wrong? And, especially working a lot with, now with federal agencies, new space for me, but what if your data's wrong? There's one person in your GIS office maintaining this, and they might make an error too. So a lot of the time I spend, the oxygen that I take up is explaining how people make decisions to map, basically human nature. People start to map things they care about. Place is very, very personal. And, how this project matured into what it is today is because of all those people who cared about mapping their neighborhoods and their sidewalks and their trails and their buildings. And then industry comes in and they're, wow, they don't have to pay Google. I can just use this data. And so kind of explaining that has been a challenge on the one side. The tools are another. I think the tooling is very good, and it's definitely evolved within the OpenStreetMap ecosystem. The ID editor has a lot of presets now. It's really good. Now there's even, machine learning tools, to just kind of there's map swipe. You can, yes, that's there. No, that's not there. So the tooling is evolving, and it's allowing more people to participate in providing this data. But at the same time, you still have spaces where it's really difficult for people to contribute information to OpenStreetMap because it's not that easy. We're working in the trails and recreation space right now and trying to improve data in recreation. And you have a land manager working in a giant national park, and some of the trails might not be tagged right, but All Trails is showing it as a regular trail. It's a social trail, but who has the bandwidth to go in as a land manager managing Canyonlands National Park or something and say, I'm going to tag all the trails on OpenStreetMap. I don't even know how to use it, but let's go ahead and do that. So I think there's a lack of resources in our federal government, but there's also a lack of resources for a volunteer community. So what I hit, tools, resources, disbelief, anything else I missed? There's a lot, but I'll just stick with those and we can keep moving it quickly because I know.
Thank you.
All right. So one of the first I feel like sometimes when people not from the public sector wonder why the public sector isn't putting out this data, they think it's a lack of technical expertise. and a lack of will. And I just want to say that most of the agencies, many of the agencies that we've talked to have the will, or if they don't have the will, it's just because it's like, not that it's not important, but it's just underneath all the other 1,000 things that they're required to do. And it's not a must do, it's a nice to do. And for the most part, the technical expertise or aptitude is there. If they might not have the exact knowledge they need to have at that moment, but many of them are capable of going out and getting that knowledge. So what are the barriers, though? A lot of it is the fact that when I'm talking about transit agencies and GTFS, because that's what I have the most experience in, it's in it not being a requirement, although that has changed. As of, I don't know if anybody has read the Federal Register recently. You know, Thomas, of course, has. And I have too, because there was a new rule that just came out that you know, is part of the National Transit Database reporting that fixed route transit agencies need to have GTFS posted. And so that really helps the legitimacy of providing a GTFS feed, and all of those staff people at the agencies can point to that rule to their managers and be like, I need time and resources to be able to do this. And so really it's a resource allocation. There's so many different things that the transit agencies need to do. Do I spend my time improving the schedules, or do I spend my time improving the data about the schedules? And then I would say one of the other big barriers is the, it's a little bit of a chicken egg issue. It's just the stability and the evolution of the standards themselves. And so GTFS is an evolving standard, but everything past its initial initiation is optional. And so what constitutes a good GTFS feed is a big question mark. And what's a good GTFS feed that will actually provide users all the information that they want has been a big question. There's a lot of vendors who will say, yeah, we output GTFS, and literally it's every single minimum value of the field or the minimum required set of fields, and that actually doesn't provide a lot of information. That's literally like stops and schedule. It doesn't have anything about the navigability of the system. And so much less about how much it costs and whether or not you need to go up and down stairs or anything about the accessibility of the system. And so as part of the California Integrated Travel Project, Thomas, again, helped me with this, we put together what we call the GTFS, the California Minimum GTFS Guidelines, or now we call them the Minimum Transit Data Guidelines for California, which basically sets an elevated standard based on what we heard that users actually needed. And we do a lot of evaluation on data quality based on that. But even just having those guidelines that we post that are optional, technically, for any transit provider ever, but also in California, they're still optional. It allows that staff to point to that and tell the managers or tell their vendors, hey, this is what we need to do to serve our transit riders. The minimum isn't actually that helpful. We need to get there. And so I think it's not just about providing the data, it's about providing the data at a level of quality and comprehensiveness that's actually useful to your transit riders that you're serving.
I have lots of words, but I don't really have much content to add over to what you've just heard. So, well done. Thank you, ladies. The two things I'll rephrase in different ways. First, trust is everything. There's no such thing as a perfect data set. When I teach data analysis and urban transportation planning, do the acronym. So you should always use best available data. Do the acronym, best available data, right? And if you're not using bad data, why aren't you, right? But any data set you use is bad data. Trust me, there are things that are wrong, right? I've had people with traffic counting devices. They've been around for 100 years, and two of them will stand next to each other, plugged into the same sensor, and argue that my counter is better than your counter, right? And they won't use the other guy's data or other gal's data because it came from their device and not my device. And you just slap your head and think, we're reporting freeway volumes on I-5 as average annual daily traffic, and you added decimal points at the end of the 352,273.6 vehicles per day. Oh, stop. Okay, please stop. But the real issue is, I didn't collect it. It's not good, right? the fact that my data came from 1995, but yours was crowdsourced, we have to get over that. Okay, so there's some way of we have to build trust, and we have to come to the conclusion we have to make the improvement. So that is a huge issue. How you survive that. It's not mine. How you survive that is huge no matter who collected it, no matter who's using it. And getting over that, building that trust, to me is the biggest barrier altogether. The second real big barrier in the public sector is return on investment. And I use that term instead of any other because the return can be political capital. We can actually make some of these cool maps that Anat and Kristen were showing you earlier. Who can walk to transit, who can't walk to transit? Who can get around Seattle when the elevators are open? Don't ask me what the dollar value of that is, but wow, that's a really cool video, a really cool image. I've used it about 45 times at this point. All right, so sometimes it's dollar value, sometimes it's political, sometimes it's whatever. And that value goes up and down, but so does the cost of doing it. The lower you can drive the cost to participate, because I got great things and when I went out to bid, if you don't get to win if you don't give me these things. That's a great reduction in my cost to be able to deliver this data set, because I didn't have to go out and pay you individually, right? So if I can drop those costs and I can raise the benefits, happy citizens, federal reporting, better planning software, and those all vary. So that, to me, those two barriers, our return on investment has sucked for data collection for years and years and years. We need to change that. And our trust in the data that somebody else collect has to go up, and we have to find our ways to build that trust in order to get it. And that's really just different words for what you've heard from these two brilliant ladies next to me.
Okay, so what is your best practices or roadmap to ameliorate some of these barriers?
Thanks, Mark. That's all. That's what he said. Okay. So best practices. Gosh, I mean, I think we're still kind of developing those, but I do know that within OpenStreetMap, community has to remain in the room. So for OpenStreetMap US, having all of that input is paramount, you know, and community means all of the different kinds of stakeholders. You know, it might just not be the individual volunteer mappers, you know, it's our government partners, our industry partners, private partners, our academic partners. And, you know, for all of OpenStreetMap US's work, we try to create working groups or steering committees that include those voices and continue to try to bring more stakeholders into the room. And I think that echoes a lot of what everyone was saying today about getting the people who are impacted by the data in the room, no matter what the data is you're talking about. And that building trust. So a roadmap for a public domain map, one of the steps that are built into that workflow is, okay, we're going to use the crowd to add all these railroad tunnels in Colorado. That's great. And then the second step is that representative from the federal agency, designated person, is going to be trained by OpenStreetMap US to validate the data. And you know, if we continue to do these projects, you know, agencies can identify the data gaps within their data sets, you know, whether it's curb cuts or railroad tunnels or trailheads or campsites. And I am inspired, and I hope that, you know, through this validation process, as these agency representatives continue to play teacher and check the data, you know, make sure it's okay, and as they hopefully see that these data inputs are actually really good and solid, that validation process will kind of build that trust. You know, I can't wait to download this data. It has all these attributes. They even put the surface type of a trail in there. That's amazing. So through that public domain process, I'm hoping that trust is also built, because we're providing a real need to both open data and public data in that process. Thought I had one more, but I might add it later.
Best practices. So I think that one of the #1 things is to be clear about the data that you need and why, and mapping those with the questions that need to be answered or a real derived user need, so that you can get the political capital to maintain it to begin with. And being clear about the data also includes being clear about which exact specification. I mean, I've heard however many different data specifications spoken about here. It would be great if we could all arrive on like a toolkit that we're all using. And to be able to sort of invest in that ecosystem, define exactly what you need, expand it as new use cases arise, but like be very clear about what it is. And clear not just about the data that's there, but also performance measures for how accurate it is, and to be able to measure that about accuracy, measure the data quality. And there's some suggestions out in the hall about one of the posters about how to measure data quality of OpenStreetMap in particular. And I think that that's really important. So like set clear standards. And we've done that at Cawley TP through the GTFS minimum guidelines. GTFS itself has the GTFS best practices. We're one step above that. But there's also gaps that exist in the GTFS world. For GTFS real-time, there's actually no standard agreed upon performance metric for accuracy. And we're actually working on, if you're interested in that, please let me know and come find me because I have a working paper I would love for you to review. Because we need to define that, because we need to be able to measure, are we actually giving out good data? Because inaccurate data about real time is probably worse than no data. So we need to be cognizant of that. So that's one, is like, be clear about what you want to get from it. The second one is to create self-reinforcing processes for measuring that and improving quality. So for our example, in Cawley TP, we have daily downloads of every GTFS feed in the state of California, and we're running it through a series of, we have it running through a data pipeline that evaluates, is this meeting the basic GTFS standard for ingestion into like Google's pipeline, into Transit App's pipeline, into Apple's pipeline, et cetera. Is this meeting our GTFS minimum guidelines? And if so, what parts are not being met? And so we have flags, and we have these critical validation errors, and we have people set up to like call agencies and be like, hey, I noticed like your fares data dropped off yesterday. Wondering what happened with that. Is there anything we can help you with? And so then we have, and those are for the people who are, we have this, critical pipeline that happens on a daily basis, and then we have a monthly pipeline that goes to decision makers and planners where they can look at a dashboard and see how they're doing over time. And we send out monthly reports to them. And then we have an even rolled up dashboard to the state about how well we're doing. So there's all these self-reinforcing processes for making sure that the data is of good quality, and I think that that's really important. The other thing that I think is really important, and something I meant to say in the one of the barriers, is about maintainability and coming up with maintenance plans. And your bad data gets even badder as time goes on. So as time goes on, data changes, especially if you're talking about GTFS data. Your schedule that you put in last year probably isn't the schedule that you are operating now. I mean, maybe it is. So we need to make sure that those processes for making sure that that data is up to date are there within the agencies. And the last thing that I'll say is that we found it really important to make sure that we're providing value add from the data at various levels of decision making. So we're making sure that we're giving reports and interesting like things that I don't think are that important, but are like fun things that other people can show to their bosses that they think are important in decision making. So fun little, like we put out, oh look, with GTFS real time you can make these speed maps to look at where transit is slowing down. And like, I could tell you where transit is slowing down anyways, but most agencies already know where their transit is slowing down. But when you show that to decision makers and policy makers in a room, they're like, oh, that's so cool. Why, why is there this gap? It's like, oh, that's because that agency doesn't collect GTFS real time. Like, oh, well, they need to. So like being able to put the sort of soft pressure at various decision-making levels has been really critical to get the buy-in, and not just buy-in, like excitement about like making sure that we have data across the board everywhere.
Let's go next question. I'm not going to add quality to anything you just heard. So
I was going to open it for the public.
I'm really in the dark. Most cities, and I guess I'm really in the dark. Most cities and counties in this country have to do an ADA transition plan, and a self-evaluation plan, and they survey, the prow, everything's surveyed, and now you're telling me that's all garbage. I mean, please help me out on this.
It's not garbage. It's just not necessarily what you think it is. We actually we actually did an evaluation of multiple ADA plans. We had a grad student, the Rachels of the world. For some reason, lots of you may have to be named Rachel in order to work for Mark. For some reason, I don't know why that is. A previous Rachel did an analysis in things like City of Redmond, great city. Good sidewalk network. They actually have a routable sidewalk network. There is no mention of sidewalks in their ADA plan at all, except within the parking lot. Can you get from my parking lot via a sidewalk to the City of Redmond building? Because City of Redmond doesn't. They don't own the sidewalks. So it was not in their ADA. Whoever consultant they hired, it is not. And actually, sidewalks didn't show up in a considerable, I don't remember what the percentage is, but it was way bigger than we expected. They're not in the ADA plans because they're not the cities.
Sidewalks? I don't get that.
The ownership is actually of the property owner, and they have a requirement in order to maintain it, which is not enforced unless you're in Massachusetts and you have to plow it when it snows. But even then, yeah.
Supposed to plow in Seattle?
Yeah, we're supposed to plow, and to be honest, in my neighborhood, when it snows here, of course, Seattle doesn't do snow very well, but when it does, Mark actually shovels his driveway and the ones on either side, because those are the nice neighbors, and I actually have a useful snow shovel. But again, who actually owns and operates sidewalks is actually far more complex than we expect. In most areas of the country, sidewalks are not owned by the city. There are rules and regulations that apply, but they're not necessarily owned by the city. In Seattle, for example, if you see on Access Map, at south of Northeast 85th, there are sidewalks everywhere. North of Northeast 85th, there are almost no sidewalks. And the reason was because at the time that north of Northeast 85th started to be developed, it was county land, and county did not require sidewalks, and therefore you could develop much less expensively if you didn't put in drainage and you didn't put in sidewalks, and therefore all of that was built without sidewalks because they could then sell it cheaper, which meant they could sell their developments more than inside the city. And so that is a legacy, because to fix that, you can't essentially make an individual property owner can't build a sidewalk network. The city doesn't have the resources to go in and put in drainage, take property rights, and build the right-of-way for the sidewalk. On the other hand, when you have a new permit, you say, oh, if you're going to build here, you have to put in a sidewalk. And so then you get sidewalk segments that are disconnected from everything because you can't make the property owners on either side. Just did a talk with Denver in a San Francisco Spur. You're from San Francisco, you may know Spur. They're an advocacy group. And in Denver, they actually just passed in the last year a major property tax increase, specifically so that the city has a money source to go build out their sidewalk system and to fix the ones that are there. So in this case, the city is actually taking on the cost of repair of private property because they have a public right-of-way over top of it.
I want to just kind of elevate and raise, I think we really need to start, thinking about sidewalks differently, and I really appreciate Anat's suggestion earlier of just, recognizing that sidewalks are a utility and everything that follows from that. And the ways in which legally and also just practically we just disrespect the sidewalk in a million ways every day. I mean, and bike lanes in the curb area, as well. Whenever it snows in Portland, which we don't get much, suddenly my bike shed, walk shed shrinks about 99% more than the car driver's drive shed does. I just want to throw in another barrier that I didn't hear, I think earlier, but it kind of relates, Mark, to your trust comments from public agencies. There's a hesitancy to accept that, we did something bad or wrong or could do something better. I know, right? We messed up sometimes, apparently repeatedly, frankly, for hundreds of years. But like this really, it turns into oftentimes, Elizabeth, you mentioned about kind of the data being held ransom by various private companies, and there's often a dynamic at agencies that may use software from those companies to not want to call that out publicly, to not want to state that that is what is happening. And sometimes that makes sense because there really are constraints for that private, small private company that maybe prevents something. Sometimes there really aren't constraints, and we're not. We got sold this thing that we had a ribbon cutting ceremony for, and once the ribbon is cut, it has to be working perfectly. And so now we're not, willing to say like, we actually need something else, and we need to do better. And we're not necessarily thinking long term. We're thinking about what our executive director or our manager or a board member is going to yell at us about next week, instead of thinking about, sure, I could do this study this way with this, best available data that is truly bad, or I could tell my general manager that I can't do this right now in a good way. And if I had these resources, I could do this in this way. And so I think there's these barriers along the lines of like us as public servants being willing to not just get done with the task, but rather think about like accept failure, accept punting, and accept looking at the future, the strategy that we need to be pursuing as opposed to these individual tasks along the way. So
+1.
2.
Can I also add to that, Thomas? Because you reminded me of something else, which was, you said accept failure basically in, I think the implied thing that you were saying is in executing a contract that maybe allowed the vendor to hold my data hostage, amongst other things. And one of the things that we've really noticed in working with agencies of all size across the state of California is the disparity between the power that an agency with a $10 million CAD-AVL project it has versus one with an agency with 25 vehicles. And those agencies that have less than 100 vehicles, they have almost zero negotiating power with most of the vendors. And what we've been trying to do is to try and consolidate and pool a lot of those contracts so that they have pooled negotiating power. But that's a real issue, I would say, is that the vendors hold the power, all the power in those cases. And you can't blame them for not wanting to specialize or apply to all of these convoluted RFPs that we all produce as public agencies. And so something that agencies can make sure to do is to join master service agreement procurements when they can, so that they're not just adding to another pool of another set of micro requirements. We all think that we're special snowflakes, but really maybe we could be snowflake cookies and just sort of like be as much cookie cutter as we can, maybe add just a little bit of frosting on top that's different. I don't know if that metaphor made any sense, but.
I think at one point we had conversations about coalition buildings, and that was kind of a theme around here, with the DRT discussion. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are some stewardship models through coalition building?
We're all looking. You take this question. Sorry about that.
We do have the largest coalition. I have a lot of stories, but my favorite this week is I went to the International Trails Summit to talk about one of our current coalition building efforts. We're creating something called the Trails Stewardship Initiative to improve all the trails in the United States so that they show up on third-party private apps that people get paid money for correctly. Doesn't that seem a little backwards? But someone stood up and he looked at me as a land manager, very frustrated because, I understand the plight. It's like National Park Service spends all this money making their maps. They're authoritative. They tell everyone to go. But then someone rolls in with CalTopo or AllTrails, and I'm like, no, sorry, my phone says to turn right. And the land manager could be standing right in front of the person. No, that trail doesn't exist. It's closed. It's dangerous. We'll have to come save you later. So the guy stood up and he said, "Who are these mappers?" It took me like a good 20 seconds to take a deep breath. I just kind of start from the beginning again. But the first thing I want to do when I start to build that coalition is invite that person into the room. I want to find all the people who want to yell at me and then invite them into the working group, because I think that's where you need to start with the conflict first and figure out the hardest parts and then work your way back. Don't start with the easy, the low-hanging fruit. How are you going to get to the top of that tree? You're going to get those people to buy into this and help, right? So, not those people, that doesn't sound nice, but the people who probably, are impacted the most and are probably very, very frustrated about feeling like they have no power in the cycle or no voice in the room. So I wouldn't say I have an entire list of best practices for this. Give us a year of this initiative and I can share a little bit more, but that would be the first thing. Is like really look around and think about, say who's missing and who's, invite them if you can.
Note to self, start with the people who scream at you.
Maggie, I'm really surprised that the first thing you didn't say was to staff the coalition, because I think that that's actually one of the biggest things that's missing from a lot of coalitions. And so, I think that there, as you noted, there is a big upswing in the ability of the coalition of OpenStreetMap to move forward once you actually made it your full-time job. And so I think that that's really important. As part of the mobility data interoperability principles, we staffed a product manager that's Scott Fraser, who's awesome, who would be here, except that he's at the SUMC, Shared Use of Mobility Summit instead. And so I think that, staffing it and having a point person is critical, and resourcing it appropriately.
I think the reason I didn't say that is because it's really, really hard for us to find resources. So that just seems like it's easier for me to get the angry people in a room than it is for me to hire and find money. So that's my reality, I guess.
The only thing I'll add is once you bring those angry people into the room on your coalition, find a way that they have a win out of it. Because if they have a win out of it, they'll stay, right? And then they'll support you because they've got wins. And so look for wins. Any way you can get wins. Again, that to me, then in that ROI discussion, it's if they have wins, then they have benefits. When they have benefits, they can fight for resources. And the more people you have with wins, the better off you are. Because if you lose 2 and you have 30, you still have 28 wins all fighting for you. Whereas if you only have 1 client and that client loses their budget, you're in deep trouble. But if you have 29 other people that are going to have major aspects of their system fall apart, they will go to the council or the legislature or whatever and say, don't stop this. In this state, the state DOT, they have collected data on every state highway in the state by driving around the state every 2 years. And 40 years ago, they actually did it with 2 people in vans with 1 person counting cracks as they drove down the street. Think how expensive that is. And yet they did it because they showed up at the legislature with, here's the condition of your roadways, this is what you're going to get if you give us this much money, this is what you aren't. And oh, by the way, if you don't fund this data collection effort, you don't get this key piece of decision making. And so every year the legislature said, yep, you get that. And anybody who tried to kill it, they showed up at the legislature and said, well, they're trying to kill this, but you won't get these graphs. And the legislature said, here you go. So look for those wins in that stakeholder group of people who are yelling at you, because suddenly when they get that out and you get off of their back, or at least partly off their back, then they become your biggest champions, and that's a great thing.
Gerald, I know you have had the microphone for a while. Do you have a...
Daryl Dudley, the United States Department of Transportation. I'm a federal employee. I'm here to help.
The line here is, I'm from Washington. We're here to help.
Yeah. Just some interesting points the panel has made, talking about trusts and the value of data has no value if you're not sharing it, right? So one way you can build trust and share the data is to create metadata and publish it. So if you have data that's important to you, please fill out your metadata, publish it alongside the data, and that builds trust, and it also helps discoverability and access. So there is an ISO standard, 19555, I think it is. It is a pain in the butt, but it's important to build that trust, and the positive externalities of that are discoverability, accessibility, and all that kind of stuff. And if you really want to go that extra step, publish your data to data.gov. So just some things there. And another point about public domain map that Maggie's kind of hinting around is that it's not just for the federal government, it's for every level of government, state, counties, tribal governments. So once it's created and it's running well and it's working right, there's a lot of value we can do to create a lot of value for the public by having that system to create data in the public domain. Also want to say thank you to Maggie and kudos to her for all the hard work she's done on that. So anyway, that's my spiel.
Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we are past our time, not just out of time. I think that was a good note to end on. Thank you. I really want to thank, firstly, everybody that showed up and stayed around. So thank you to you. Thank you to our panelists who are stellar end to our day. I really appreciate our interpreters today. Thank you. The production hurdles of running a hybrid meeting are not to be underestimated, and our production team has been an amazing help today. So thank you, you guys. And to you guys remotely, thank you again. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge our team internally that helped me put this together. So Alex Emmons, Rachel, Mark, Mario, who's not in the room right now, Jessica, and several others. We hope to see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's content is very different. We're going to do mostly like co-design sessions around the data specs themselves and just sort of community visioning on the definitions. But we will also have the experiences of people who tried to integrate data, specifically from Taylor Reich, from ITDP, and several others with experience. So we hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.